We're primarily dependent on broadcast media, things like radio, television, news, things that were broadcast out to the masses. With new media, that's what's changed. So what's changed is not so much that, oh, all of a sudden we have post-truth, it's that we became much more networked, news became much more digitized. There seemed to have been a peak in 2016, and I don't think I have to say what specific events happened in 2016, but it seemed to be a peak. We don't know. That might be a local peak. We may still have other surprises coming. But what seemed to happen there was the private and public spheres all of a sudden were no longer distinct. So everybody was not only a consumer of news, but all of a sudden each one of us also created news. So that was something that was interesting. And then as we got into more recent times, the possible consequences began to be much more serious. One of the first countries to pass legislation concerning post-truth is, in fact, Germany in 2018. And what's going to happen next? So I'm not going to leave you hanging. It's kind of a quick tour of history, but what I'd like to focus the talk on is what can we do? And by we, I mean those of us who are professionals in the field of information management, those of us who educate future professionals in this area. What can we do? I think we don't have to say it, but social media is what changed everything. So this is why we are. In the past, not everybody could have such a huge immediate impact. You had to have a lot of money, you had to have a lot of, you had to be owner of a corporation that had a lot of influence, but today, anyone, literally anyone in this room, anyone in the world can have a huge impact and start spreading something called false news or fake news. Primarily what has happened, and again this should not be new to any of you in the room, is we have much more information than we ever did. And we have it coming at us from multiple channels non-stop. So this is a well-known phenomenon of information overload. The paradox, though, it's analogous to the paradox that happened when we introduced computers. I don't know if any of you are as old as I am and you remember when we first invented computers, everyone was talking about, oh, well, people will only have to work 2 or 3 days a week because the computers will do all the work. Don't think that happened. What happened is actually the computers we're working for the computers. I don't know if you ever took the time to estimate how long it takes you in a given day to answer emails. Yeah, that was a nice invention, right? So that was a productivity paradox. We thought they were going to save us a lot of time. So now, with all these channels, lots of information, that's better, right? More is always better. Not really. Because the problem is, while we have, as Baudrillard said very well, we have more information, but we have less meaning. So that's the paradox of the information-rich world we're living in now. And then again, I'm sure you're all familiar with the key phases in models of information behavior. So with the confirmation bias that we just were talking about, the fact that we like hearing similar ideas to ours, there's a lot of information avoidance behavior. Right? Part of it is because of the overload. We simply don't have time. We don't have time to check everything. But it's also a deliberate behavioral action that a lot of people are taking. So the minute there is news or information that doesn't confirm, then we kind of ignore it or go out of our way to avoid it. So the combination of the two is what has created a really significant problem today, as opposed to what was happening in the past. Information overload plus information avoidance minus time, right? So the most precious resource today is time. No one has time. I'm sure everyone in this room right now, you are still receiving information, right? As I speak, from your phones, laptops, I'm getting it from my watch that's telling me to breathe or something or walk more. It's just nonstop. We don't have time. So the combination of those factors makes it just so much more comfortable for us to just stay within that confirmation bias. It's a lot easier. Part of staying in our confirmation bias is that we are really dealing in a world today where content is crowdsourced. So whereas before we had expert authorities, professional journalists, subject matter experts, people who had some credentials and they said, these are the facts, this is what you should be doing. We don't do that anymore. We are getting our news, our information, our education, really, to some extent, from our gang, our crowd, our tribe. And of course, the biggest one, at least in North America, is Facebook. And I think the statistic today is 66% of North Americans learn about what's happening in the world through their personal Facebook network. So if you think about your own Facebook network, who would you be friends with? Well, you may have one or two friends who think completely differently than you do, but the majority are going to be thinking like you do. It's kind of the definition of being a friend, right? So it's this group think, and the other really interesting phenomenon is the speed. Again, I feel like I'm sometimes giving a lesson in history. I'm sure a lot of the younger folks in here, I don't know, well, maybe I'll ask, has anyone here ever sent something through the mail? Have you recently sent anything important, you know, put a stamp on the letter, put it in the mailbox, and then waited 2 weeks to hear back? If you live in Canada, which is where I live, you can wait a very long time because they always go on strike, and the day before I left Canada, they went on strike. So you probably don't remember those times. Now imagine today, what would be for you an unacceptably long period of time to wait for a reply to something? You sent it through your Facebook network. Would you be willing to wait 48 hours for someone to say, yeah, that's a good idea, you should do that? Would you wait 24 hours? Would you guess how long the average time to react is today? It's something like less than 2 minutes. More than 2 minutes, you start getting messages like, oh my God, are you okay? Is everything okay? Should I call a doctor? Like, what's going on? Because it's almost real time. It really is. So the speed of sharing of any content, whether it's true or not, is just accelerated beyond our comprehension. We are literally checking all the time. And it's that leads to a phenomenon, again well known, something in psychology that's called repetition theory. And very simply put, repetition theory is like the more you hear something, the more likely you are to believe it. That just wears you down. And Facebook, all social media, are designed to share, to repeat. Right? So you retweet, you repost, you share, you like, it's all happening really, really quickly. So again, the reason though, it's a good reason. Why do we do this? Is because there's a great deal of trust. Believing is not just automatically guaranteed because you've heard an expert say something, right? It doesn't happen that way. If a trusted colleague, a trusted family member or friend says the same thing, that carries a lot more weight. So what's happening in our closed, crowdsourced circle is there's a great deal of trust, which is good. There's a great speed of sharing, which is great, and the possibility of repetition is wonderful. The problem is the content, right? So very few people will take the time to actually validate or confirm. We kind of take it as, oh, it's coming from a trusted friend or colleague, and we share it, and it goes on and becomes exponential. So very interesting. So what's happening, if we look at it from a more research or theoretical perspective, is we are living in what's called filter bubbles. Again, not necessarily a new notion, but more relevant today than ever. And a filter bubble means that all of the content that we are consuming, all the information we're consuming, is being filtered through our trustworthy friend circle. So in this way, the value really becomes determined by what we call reach. So that could be something like number of likes. If any of you do research using social network analysis, that's another way of looking at reach. Like, piece of news was shared by whom, how fast did it reach, how many people. And today it's really, it could be something as simple as a quantitative counting of the number of likes. So that's really what's determining the value. So this is again, I'm not saying anything new. I think we're all aware of this. There are a number of reasons why. I don't think it's going to go away. I don't know. There is a movement where people are shutting down their Facebook accounts. But you know what happens? Well, again, you're not old enough to remember. Before Facebook, there was MySpace. Before MySpace, there was Second Life. after Facebook, there might be something else if people opt out. But the phenomenon is not going to go away. The phenomenon is with us. So that leads us to say, what can we do? How can we help in this situation? And what I'd like to propose to you today is something that we've been working on at the McGill School of Information Studies, and that I personally have been involved in, well, now it's been over 20 years. My background is in artificial intelligence. So I'd like to propose to you a way forward that combines the strengths of machine learning and artificial intelligence, but without removing the human being from the equation. Because really the best solution is always going to be what we call hybrid AI, which is a combination of the two. And really, to manage information is, by definition, to filter it. We just want to offer tools that will ensure that the filtering is done in a better way. One that helps you get at the best of both worlds. Empirical or otherwise verifiable veracity and validity in the content, and still harnessing all of the benefits, the speed, the reach, the trustworthiness of our social networks. So how can knowledge management fit into this? So, for the past little while I've been in the field of knowledge management. Well, there's some interesting processes on how to manage your knowledge. And this has been done at the level of organizations primarily, individuals, but it can be done at the level of your bubbles, your social networks, and it can be done at the level of society even. And from there I extracted a small part of knowledge management and a particular knowledge management cycle that was proposed and is used quite widely today by McElroy. And his, there are a lot of models and process models and life cycle models in knowledge management, and I did an analytical review of them. McElroy always stood out as being different than all the others, which made me curious. So I actually contacted him and was surprised, though I shouldn't have been surprised, to find out the reason his model is different is because he's from Scotland. Now you may say, what does Scotland have to do with it? I mean, so, but that's how he explained it. Because in his model, which I will show you, we don't need to go into all of the details. All knowledge management models look a little bit like this, where you have something where you produce knowledge, you integrate knowledge, you share knowledge, and so forth. But in the McElroy cycle, he had something called knowledge claims. It was very interesting. So for McElroy, all knowledge is a hypothesis. It's something that you claim is true. And in the knowledge management process cycle that he elaborated, he says each of these claims should be tested, right? And if they are validated, then they become part of the organizational knowledge base. So he was one of the only people, researchers in this area who put in this notion of validating the content, investigating it, seeing if it holds water or not. And you will, of course, have competing knowledge claims as you go through this. So what does this have to do with him being Scottish? Well, I found out, I didn't know this. Do any of you know anything about the Scottish legal system? You watch sort of, but you know something about the law, I assume it's the same. You know, you watch all the criminal justice shows with the lawyers, the judge, and at the end, you're either guilty or not guilty, right? Not in Scotland. Look what happens in Scotland. There are 3 possible outcomes in the Scottish legal system. And this is why, for McElroy, it made sense for him to put this knowledge claim into his conceptual model. In Scotland, you can be found not guilty, you can be found guilty, and then there's a third verdict that says, you know what, it's not proven. I don't know how you go through life with not proven, but that's the thing that they have. It actually not only explains the McElroy cycle, but it shows us that, yeah, you know, this is an interesting concept, and we can use that. If we start off with the hypothesis that anything that we're going to manage, all information and knowledge, actually starts out as a knowledge claim, then the knowledge management processes fit really well into what you do with this. And this kind of threefold outcome actually makes a lot of sense. So that's where KM can help. Where does artificial intelligence come into this? So I wanted to share with you some of the research that we're doing in this area, starting with Professor Fung. He's a researcher and professor in our school. So Ben has done some interesting things. One of the projects, we started off working with the Canadian police on this one, and it was initially to investigate online fraud. So what this particular process does is we send out soft bots, right, so web crawlers, and they essentially mine text that's been written and posted and sent out. So imagine all the content from Facebook on a particular topic. What the artificial intelligence program can do is tell you that a particular corpus of messages.
Şu anda online bilgi hizmetlerinde ne yapıyorum? Birazcık çok kısaca firmamızdan bahsettiğimiz
and text was written by the same person. And if we do a second round of our analysis, in the majority of the cases we can identify who that person is. So this becomes quite interesting when we look at what's being shared out there. Is it one person? Is it a troll? Is it someone trying to damage someone's reputation? So although we were doing it to detect online fraud, again, I don't know, this is something that happens in North America. It might happen here. You can tell me. There's fraud where, let's say you have an apartment to rent and you put it on online classified ads, and you rent it to someone, and you say, I need the first and last month's rent as a deposit. They send you a check, but they made a mistake, an honest mistake. I was supposed to send you $1,700. I made the check out. My mistake to $2,000. Would you mind sending me back the $300? And you're thinking, well, $300. Now I'm not talking US dollars. Let's talk Canadian dollars. It's not that much. Okay, 300. What is it worth trying to commit online fraud? Yeah, but multiply that. How easy is it to do that online? 5 times, 10 times, 5,000 times, and then you're making quite a nice amount. So that's one thing you can do to analyze what's going on, because the strength of artificial intelligence compared to us is, of course, big data analytics. You can set off your programs to not only retrieve, but to analyze huge volumes of data, and it could be text, it could be images, it could be multimedia. We also used, with Fabian, and we also looked at, for example, identifying bias. So post-truth, as we all have been saying, is all about appeal to your belief system, you have an emotional impact. So we can identify, using AI, patterns of biased content. One of the biases that we found, for example, was in hiring. So again, I don't know if you have this, a lot of companies like Microsoft, Amazon, if you want a job with them, everything is done online. You send your resume online, you answer questions online, you get hired online, you start working, that's it, you never saw a human being. So when we looked at the large volume of online applications, it was fairly easy to identify a bias. The AI program itself could be biased, which I'll get to in a sec, but you can also use that to identify bias. And it was found that, for some strange reason, men seemed better qualified, white men, so even online, and this is when you can't even see the person, so there was still that bias. And then last but not least, Professor Moffitt is doing some interesting research, and part of what we're doing there is we're looking at using artificial intelligence for good, like ethical use of AI, because AI programs, while they are very good at analyzing large amounts of data, they're not good at common sense. That's where human beings will always have the advantage. So if there is a bias, if there's something where it's learning the wrong thing, then that's an issue as well. But we can identify that, as long as there's a human being doing a reality check on what the AI program is giving us. So again, just recently found a bias was found at Amazon, where because of the sample. So as researchers, you all know, it's the same problem with AI as with any kind of research. It's garbage in, garbage out. If the sample is not representative, if the sample is biased, then the AI program will learn the wrong things. So as long as we keep an eye out for that, and not have it 100% automated, I think hybrid systems will be of great value to us in a post-truth world. Where's the human being in all this? All right, again, Facebook users, I don't know if you're Facebook users. If you are, you will know that there's a new feature now where you can report fake news. Quite easy. It's not artificial intelligence. It's very easy to do. It's manual. You click on the top, right click, and you say, I don't think this is right. Can you investigate this? Or this one doesn't look like. So it's the opposite of confirmation bias, right? So if you have enough people doing this, now you get crowdsourced validation of the content that's going on there. Because again, as we all know, information exists within a context. It is also shaped by its context. And in today's world, it's shaped by your community. So your community is the biggest filter on that. So you can use that to combat the negative bias, right? So it works, but you need to do it in a hybrid way. And then how can we be, as an information schools, and information professionals, how can we help? Well, there's a lot we can do. None of this is new to us, right? I mean, we know this. We have this skill set. So in our curriculum, we already, most information schools teach information literacy. We need to go beyond that. There's a term now that's being used in a much more widespread fashion, and that's meta-literacy. And it's because we need to be literate about more than information, because information is multifaceted. We need to be literate about digital, computers, all sorts of things. So it's multiple forms of literacy. We need to assess credibility of sources, something that, of course, we already teach in our curriculum. Research methods like triangulation. Can you find at least 3 independent data sources that are saying the same thing? This is a perfect mechanism to use in a post-truth world. And, of course, critical reasoning skills. This is perhaps the most challenging one because it doesn't come to us intuitively unless you're a very skeptical person by nature. People tend to accept what's being told to them, especially if it comes through the medium of a technological tool. For some strange reason, we trust technology a lot. You know, it seems like, oh, but it's been, you know, it's formal, it's official. We trust people up here at a podium with a mic saying, you should be, okay, thank you. You know, so we need to teach people to be much more critical and go through the reasoning. How do you spot fake websites? I mean, they've become really sophisticated these days. I'm sure my colleagues in the room get the same thing. I mean, every week I am asked to be an editor of some journal I've never heard of, or join this very prestigious editorial team of whatever, or publish in this wonderful new journal. And I mean, it doesn't take long. If you do just even a preliminary sort of analysis and you realize, no, these people don't even really exist, do they? But we do that. We need to teach that, right, to our students and our graduates. We need to teach them to have this, you know, a healthy degree of skepticism, and then the tools and the skills to kind of look into it a little more deeply. And then, of course, in the profession, information professionals have been doing this for a long time. The problem, I think, is that it's kind of hidden. People don't know what information professionals can do for them, and that goes in companies. So they need to have a kind of a more visible role. It's almost like they need to make this better known. And today is the perfect time to do so, because people are asking for this help. So I need help. I don't know how to do this. So we need to make sure that these skills are really transferred into the workplace. Things like McElroy's, you know, three possible outcomes of a proven not or guilty and not guilty. Information behavior models, things like information avoidance. And artificial intelligence can help as a tool, not as a replacement. That's why we need the hybrid systems, right? So we need to have, we're using the strengths of human beings, which is the reasoning, and the brute strength of AI, which is just able to analyze so much content that we would never have time to, and to propose to us interesting patterns. And that's the best way of hybridizing, right? Because AI will find patterns that we don't see. 80% of those may be nonsense, but 20% will lead to what we call knowledge discovery. In other words, just having gone through and analyzed such enormous amounts of data will tell us something that we could not have seen otherwise. And 20% of it will be interesting and worthwhile pursuing and see what can we do. One of the best potential, I think, is something called sentiment analysis. This has been used mostly to gauge political thinking, like doing polls before elections, but it can be used for anything. So it's essentially a text-based artificial intelligence to identify patterns, but we train the AI system to look specifically for words that are emotions. So these systems can detect, for example, message interaction that is hostile, aggressive, depression, sadness, all the emotions run the gamut. So sentiment or opinion polling is really targeted to emotions. And again, going back to Professor Yılmaz's opening, that's precisely why post-truth works. Because let's face it, it has this great impact. It has nothing to do with truth, but emotionally it engages us. And let's face it, fake news is usually more interesting than real news, right? I mean, there's a reason why we're drawn to it. Is wow, really, did that happen? Like, and then 3 days later we find out it didn't happen, but the impact has not gone away. Okay? We still had that reaction, and guess what? You remember it much better if there was emotional impact. It's really hard to forget it, actually. It stays. So something like sentiment analysis, which really targets those kinds of emotional and sort of belief systems, I think will prove very valuable in such a hybrid system. What else can we do? So in addition to our curriculum and our professional training, so we're very proud of our graduates. I share that with all the information in schools, but there's only a limit to how many we can graduate. So we need to have wider impact in our communities. And I think that should be through professional training and what we call refresher training. People who may already even have a degree in this field, the world has changed. They can come back for what we call refresher training. So at McGill, what we're doing is we have a sort of a pilot study that will be coming out soon, and we're experimenting with repackaging some of our curriculum content into short online certificates that professionals can take. So the first one that we'll be launching is on cybersecurity. How can you detect threats to your online systems and combat them? I think we need to look at this kind of outreach to go beyond our traditional educational model and start sharing what we know about the skills you need to survive and to work and live effectively in a post-truth world. And again, it's to get that out there. I was happy to meet Peter Decker this morning. He will be speaking to you later on this afternoon, because the second thing I think we all need to work on is open access. How can you expect people to take the time to validate when they don't have access to all of the really high quality information and knowledge content? So universities, some have made a lot of progress. I was always impressed that MIT was like one of the early leaders in this field, where they allow anyone to access any of their courses online, except, I believe, courses that are currently in progress, right? But you can access all of, MIT is a world-class university, not afraid to say, hey, here's what we do. And again, as I'm sure you all know, scholarly academic publishing, sort of moving towards open access, but it's a bit problematic. So for a long time, obviously there was a huge monopoly, and by monopoly, what do we mean? Filtered, right? Really restricted access to some of the best cutting-edge research that we're finding out. And again, in our particular university, McGill tends to be very, very, well, I'll call it old-fashioned. Let's be charitable and call it traditional. It's an old university. It has a particular way of thinking. So for us, and we have a tenure process, right, for our professors to become permanent, and that's a huge evaluation where we look at your scholarly output. And the problem is, McGill thinks that if you paid to have your article published, that should not count. The fact that some of this payment is not paying the person like a bribe, to get your published, but contributing towards the cost of dissemination of this knowledge through an online open access platform. So you see, it's always the cultural aspects that are harder. It's not the technology, it's everything is there, but it's the mindset. So if McGill is telling young professors on a career track that we don't value this kind of publishing as much as we value the other kind of publishing, well, where's the incentive? So we need to work against that, and we really have to look at not just text, not just documents, but really making valuable, valid information and knowledge in all formats, videos, multimedia, across not only university courses, but all of our cultural institutions, all of our institutions that hold our intellectual capital, museums, archives. I know this is a utopic vision for the future, but hopefully we'll get there, small steps, but I think it's really a key to it. And as I presented a possible solution to you today, I think also a third way to move forward is to look at these hybrid systems. And then last but not least, I think there is an issue around, I'm going to call it marketing or visibility. I don't know if this happens to you, but I end up talking to all sorts of people about post-truth, and they say, if only there were people who knew about this, who could help us. And I would say, well, what do you think librarians have been doing? What do you think information professionals have been doing? And they don't know. I say, oh really? Oh really? Do you teach that in your information school? It's like, well, it's kind of why it's called the information school, but it's not obvious to a lot of people. So I think there's some work to be done to creating greater awareness that yes, there are people who have diplomas and who have this professional skill set, and that can help in a variety of settings. But we need to somehow get that message out, and maybe be less modest. I find we're very modest in this particular area. We're sort of, oh, we do, oh, no, it's okay. We do a little bit of it. No, we should be able to stand up and say, yeah, this is exactly what we do. We know about this. We can help you. So, and on that note, I think we need to go beyond raising awareness, but I really think the information schools, and especially the I schools, should take more of a leadership role in this. I don't think we should wait for things to catch up with us. We should be leading, and we should be really showing and acting as the role models for this. And hopefully the speaker after me, which is Michael Cito, will talk about the I school and the leadership role that we can take there. So that's what I have to say to you. I think I'm okay with my time. I'm happy to continue the conversation with you. You can contact me. Here's my email address. The presentation will stay and is made available to you. I can speak Turkish very badly, but happy to converse with you. But I can't write it very well, and I don't have the Turkish alphabet, so it comes out even worse. But I'm happy to give it a try. And I'll also leave you with some of the resources if you'd like to follow. Happy to take questions at the time. Again, thank you very much for inviting me and for the opportunity to share some of my thoughts with you. Teşekkür ederim.